Okay, so today's cloud security office hours, it is August 28th, 2026, and we are going to have a presentation by Stryker. And with that, I'm just going to hand it on over to Stryker and her kitty cats.
Hi. It's wonderful to see everybody. This is already going to be a better recording and presentation than B-Sides Las Vegas. Apologies to my lovely presenters and organizers there because there are now cats. Togepi has decided this is now her spot. So, uh, welcome to the Meeple problem, the presentation that none of you signed up for, but you're going to get today anyway. This is about building security controls around actions and not roles. A little bit about me. This will immediately devolve into something I did not plan or expect based on your questions because I know all of us here. I am currently the director of threat analysis at Fable Security. We do human risk management. Pretend for a second that your security awareness training actually worked and I can prove it. That's basically what we do. Using your own telemetry and reconciling signals and reconciling against external threats and all that fun stuff. But one of the things that we do is we figure out who actually is at risk beyond who we assume is. And this is what this presentation is all about because we had a lot of assumptions going in that turned out not to be true. And we wanted to figure out why. Please link up with me on LinkedIn, ask me lots of precocious questions. I will pretend I know the answers or find them for you later. So, first of all, why in the world are we even talking about this, right? You guys are a bunch of highly experienced people. Uh, which means that hypothetically, we're all data-driven people. We have so many different data feeds all of the time. We have all of the data we could ever ask for, right? So why am I talking about only one size fits all? So please raise your hands for, and you can do so in chat and then lower them in a second. But how many of you know what a meeple is? Meeple. Anybody to play Carcassonne? Boy, there is I've got one. Thank you. Bless. Okay, two. Carcassonne uses these little wooden play figures called meeples. And you'll see there's similar ideas in things like Sorry or Trouble, very common board games, where you have single color, single variable. They only do one thing ever. And you assume based on what that shape is, what that piece does, that one color, that one movement it can ever do, that that's all it can ever do, which is really great for board games and really bad for people. People, I'm sure none of you are surprised to hear, are very complicated. And yet we often reduce people to a single variable. What do they access? How long have they been there? How big of a pain in the neck will it be if I try and stop them to do the secure thing? What is their role is often an initial variable that we use as a first draft when designing access controls. And yet first draft becomes final, as it often does. But why does it do that, right? Why are we doing that? The first is organizational logic. In a perfect world, access follows function, and then the controls you determine will follow that access. Based on someone's job description, and more often their role at a very gross level, all engineers do this and access this. Thus, they need these controls, and we're worried about them in these ways. All developers deal with data in terms of their production. Thus, all of them need reminders on how to deal with sensitive data because clearly they all have access to our databases. Fun fact, they don't. The second is regulatory frameworks. Everywhere in almost every single framework that I have studied, from NIST to state versions in New York and NYDFS and Texas, California, GDPR, all of these talk about role-based controls and training, which then becomes the one primary variable when you're trying to get things over the fence for that checkbox auditing. You also assume job function training requirements that, again, because of a role, you have the frameworks themselves assume things about role and use role as a proxy for risk when that is not always the case. And data limitations. When we forget a lot of the times how young cybersecurity is as an industry. We didn't have all of the detections previously available. Google admitted in their last 0 day study that they're not sure if they detected people manipulating 0 days faster or if our telemetry has just gotten that much better that we can finally get a handle on how quickly people are abusing code. Similarly, we didn't have all the data before, right? And so one of the only pieces of data we really had was a list of people and what their job title was. So we assumed based on this, and when we didn't have more data, that was a great first start, but now we do, and it's time we move forward from that. So let's consider some of these biases, right? There are three, generally speaking, that I've seen when consulting with clients and when studying this stuff. Satisficing. Basically, you always just try and do just enough in order to do what you need to do. And so the highest risk stuff, the more complicated things just don't have energy, don't have time. And because you've done minimum viable product, that stays final viable product. Easy to understand, especially at high resource places, but you can't fool yourself into thinking that you've actually covered all of the risks that are available. The second is probability neglect, most often known as recency bias. Well, recency bias is a little bit of a different thing, but probability neglect. People think that the worst case scenario is therefore the most likely. They conflate impact with likelihood, particularly when it comes to single variable roles. Because it would be devastating if somebody pretended to be your CEO and diverted all of the company funds in a wire transfer fraud. You therefore think that's the most likely problem, when really the your marketer who has a business corporate card of about $10,000, they could easily end up getting funds siphoned from that, and that's much more likely. We also have a shiny object syndrome problem. We're a bunch of magpies. We get bored of the same controls, the same things all the time. We're looking for the newest and greatest because we're inundated with it and we're tired of the old fights. Your executives are tired of the old fights too. They'd rather have a magic silver bullet that can solve everything because the complicated and harder question is still there. So we tend to neglect that in favor of the new shiny thing. So focusing on multivariable things instead of something like, oh, AI to solve all of our problems, when MFA and credential rotation would solve a lot of it, along with token sessions and such, you know, it's understandable and human why this happens. The last is overconfidence bias. Many of us came up through an IT help desk pipeline. Therefore, we saw the worst of humanity. You had that one person in your queue constantly who was the pain of your existence. You might have even had a department who, for environmental factors at that company where you did this work, they were especially problematic from an IT or a security perspective. Now that you're in security all the time, you have now conflated those roles, those departments, etc., into a microcosm. And because you are experienced, you assume instead of looking at the data to see if that's actually what's going on in this specific environment. Assumptions and experience are really important, and I don't want to underplay that, right? It's really, really valuable to have a starting point, a place, and a rationale of why you think something, a hypothesis. But acting on an untested hypothesis is arrogance, and we need to get away from that. So let's take a look at some of these different meeples, right? Let's take a look at single variables and how they can surprise us in ways that we didn't expect. The first is AI enablement. So this is dividing people up by a single variable that I have picked to see if they behave the way I think they will. This comes, of course, from our AI Behavior Index, the first volume of which came out this week. Huzzah! Yay! All very exciting. I'm very excited. Ask me for a link, whatever. All right. Basically, I looked at a whole bunch of people in Q2 2026, basically a little bit over 90 days. I think it's 92 from March 1 through May 30th of this year. There were 32 Fable customers whose aggregate environments were included, run the gamut in industries. I used customer tune telemetry and metadata. I did not tune their detections for them. This is therefore a commonality across all environments. I have to trust that my customers know what they're doing. You know, I'm not going to go in and tune them for them. Uh, Notice, and as I start to talk about these and I do start to apply more variables, not every customer environment has the same tools available. So the population is going to shrink from that 290,000 to smaller and smaller populations. All of the percentages are proportionate to the total possible population of people who had that variable, were in that situation, and could perform that risky behavior. That's why that population shrinks. I do try not to report on anything that, less than 100. Often it's over 1,000, et cetera, et cetera. Um, all of that fun jazz. I can talk more about the stats later, but these are participation rates. This is the average percentage of users within the available environments out of the total possible population. So, with that in mind, one of the most interesting pieces of information that I initially found in this was I would actually like to take people calling out here if you don't mind. How many people, what is the average proportion of employees that I detected that had a standalone AI license granted to them as part of a company rollout, or I detected an app, a model, a browser extension, whatever. So this is what I'm going to call AI-enabled employees. Not how many are using, but how many have a granted license from as detected from their IDP, or I detected any of the AI models that are available from on their endpoint. They had a browser extension I was able to detect. They had a standalone app. They had any of those pieces. Just call out what percentage of employees across all of our environments do you think had it? Y'all are really good at calling out.
All 34, 35, 20, 100.
Well, but percentage. So you think 100%.
In the
80%.
in the chat, it's 10%, 20%, 34, 60,
Okay.
55.
Oh, awesome.
I
Okay, you
take
guys are
it.
in chat. Oh shit. I can't see chat. Y'all have to do verbal. I'm sorry. All right. So,
34.
Sean,
20.
fuck off, Sean. All right. It was actually 34%, which is very shocking to me. And this is where I want to start cautioning you against bias and what you've been reading. A lot of the surveys that have been going out about AI enablement have two different populations they're measuring, an employee and an executive. An executive is, even in an anonymous survey, and I don't know why people do this, they lie. They want to look cool. They want to say that their company is much more enabled than perhaps they actually are at that moment. And you also have employees who, for whatever reason, may be lying. Maybe my detections can't get all of it, which might be part of it. And then um, you have that gap of about 16% then because it's about 50% of employees say they're using AI at work or they do that. So if I'm only detecting 34% of AI standalone apps in my environments where I'm able to do so, and half of the population in survey after survey has been saying that they're using it at work, that's 16% that I think is going to probably be shadow AI. One of the other pieces here too is that we assume that this variable, the single variable of are you enabled with AI, um, reflects all of the possible AI enablement, which again, personal AI, I'm not cataloging. And then when you turn on an AI feature within an app, you're using AI, but I can't detect it as part of a traditional SOC telemetry. When I looked at the percentage of applications that have advertised AI enabled features within their environment, it was about 91%. 91% of employees have at least one application that has an advertised AI feature in it. When I took out the workplace apps, so think about your Google Workspaces, your Office 365s, that went down to about 55%, which gets me right at that survey level. So it looks like about anywhere from 15 to 20% of people, like that one gap between what surveys are saying and what I was able to detect, that shadow AI in the form of applications that are currently turned on with AI features is my hypothesis. I don't know for sure. I hypothesize as well, I predict that we're going to see a lot more of this as well moving into the future because nobody wants to go through procurement again, right? We're back to environmental incentives about why people with different variables, single variables, change behavior in ways you don't expect, right? There are environmental pressures to incentivize not going through the PO process again, not having security look at something again. There's also the token maxing problem of AI operational token budgets going out of whack. I predict they're going to be disguising their AI spend within already pre-approved, let's call them static apps. Uh, and just turning those features on and saying the price increase is just part of a regular price increase. And they won't tell security, and it'll look, somebody using Excel will look exactly the same to somebody using Excel with Copilot, unless those are detected. So this is just word to the wise and a personal prediction of mine in the next 9 to 12 months or so. Within the next purchase cycle, I think we're going to be seeing a lot of that. And the reason it's relevant for this particular presentation is because those people who are using AI, they are enabled with AI, even if you can't detect it. That behavior is different. It's not a variable you would traditionally think of. And so when you start to see some of the behaviors aligning with those that I've discovered from the detectable AI-enabled cohorts, that might be a variable that you're missing and you don't think is important, but you should. These are the differences between my AI detected AI enabled employees versus the general employee baselines. I'm gonna let you sit with that for a second. And I will see if I can find the chat here to. Oh, yeah, there's lots of chats. One sec.
Compliance training overdue. That seems like a weird correlation.
Like I said, and I don't disagree. I think that's fucking weird. I'm not saying the cool thing about this report is that I'm not saying that AI is causing the change. This is just correlated. So there could be lots of reasons why that is. If I had to guess and hypothesize, AI enabled risky behaviors, you'll notice that a lot of the harder controls like DLP alert, MFA not enabled, those are a lot better. It's where the volitional behaviors, those volitional controls typically are. So, are you actually browsing where you should be? Are you listening when we send out new stuff? Those are people who are enabled with AI, it seems to be, are more likely to have those technical controls that we all worry about already enabled and those behavioral controls less there. I'm reminded of Jay's recent research with SAP, where the security control would not pop on any of those biased outcomes. Yes. Yeah, I know, but users are going to be making a much higher volume of web calls. Micah, that is an excellent thing, and that is one of my hypotheses. I actually hypothesize that this is reflecting agents and queries on chats that AI-enabled employees are doing for the unsafe browsing. When combined with high rates of AI file upload, that means they're more at risk for indirect prompt injection, which are two different detections and two different platforms that are typically not related. So just keep an eye on that if you are in a SOC or
Stryker,
anything.
just for the benefit of the video, what was the question that Micah asked?
Oh, apologies. What is the definition of unsafe browsing? AI-enabled users are going to be making a much higher volume of web calls. You assume. Is that denominator considered in the data? This is just simply what's detected. I can't tell if they use AI or not, believe it or not. I can only tell if they have it present or if they've been assigned a license. My proxy indicator for AI use was AI file uploads, which is why high rates of use plus high unsafe browsing equals indirect prompt injection issues. So just keep an eye on that. But again, if you've got better detections, please keep an eye on it. And you're making a really big, and that's, Micah, that's a great question. That's my hypothesis. I would love to validate that or to find a different explanation for why this is. However, what I'm showing you is just what the behavior is that you can detect, right? I'm not saying why is important insofar as being able to identify the underlying triggers and fix it. You have assumed something about AI-enabled users in your question. AI-enabled users are going to be making a much higher volume of web calls. You are trying to rationalize the behavior data with that experience. That is a hypothesis. Treat it as such and investigate to make sure that's true. I happen to agree with your hypothesis, but I can't tell you for sure if it's true. So let's complicate this, shall we? Because I showed you aggregate numbers for all of those AI-enabled employees and users. As it turns out, I am able to bucket together different roles for different pieces of this puzzle. And as it happens, within the AI-enabled cohort, so somebody was saying, okay, sure, they have more technical controls because they're more technical people, because that's what AI forward people are. Ha. I'm like, okay, let me separate this up into a couple of different buckets of roles that have similar environmental pressures and see if that impacts their AI usage. Because if the theory is anyone who uses AI is tech forward and thus they will behave in the more volitional, they are more technical control related, then we shouldn't see a difference with role. It's AI that's the variable that changes here, not role. So these are the different buckets that I bucketed everyone into. There is logic behind these. One of the ones I'd like to draw your attention to is administration and governance in particular. So two reasons. One, these are bucketed together again because they have similar environmental pressures. These are people who deal with outside regulators. They get a lot of external communications unprompted, which make them vulnerable to certain types of attacks, but not necessarily from customers. They are much more in line with paper and liability kinds of risk as opposed to cyber risk. They are often highly educated people. They're often arrogant as hell. And you hear all of the assumptions I'm making about those individuals in these roles as I say it. As I say, this is a very human thing to do, but you got to start somewhere. Experience matters. You test it. The other reason these were bucketed together, I needed to get a critical mass of people to have any sort of statistics worth sharing. So I also wanted to do some obfuscation. So I didn't want to reveal where this data was, and if I included all of the different roles I possibly could have in certain of these role-based categories, I would have basically been telling you, yes, this one client totally has issues with this other thing, and I didn't want to air that out. And the second, I mean, come on, ethics, right? Then I might not be able to detect and have the same kinds of roles in every environment, and I wanted to have kind of a general bucketing category. So here, my friends, is what happens when I separated these guys out. One of the things I want to draw your attention to is the spread. That's what that black bar is. The little black dot, that star that I've highlighted with the arrow, that's the average that you saw before. Look how much spread and difference there is between different types of roles and different environments when all you do is report that mean average. People behave differently. So there's something more than just AI going on with the behaviors here. There was also some interesting 2 points here, quick. There were some interesting results with executives that I will not be sharing because they did not reach a critical statistical mass. Please check out your executives and make sure they're not misbehaving. The second, which they are, but you need to be looking. The second here is that I did not include every possible risky behavior that I could have with this. One of the notable ones is no use of a password manager. That is exceptionally high. We only track that for clients who are supposed to have password managers rolled out, and it didn't show a login for at least a month. That's a problem. Please check in on that. I did not show that in this data set. I didn't want to be conflating that with a mandated use of a password manager, etc. But just because you roll it out, doesn't matter. RV, I don't disagree based on at least 2 other studies that I've done, and I'll show you some data here in a sec. There's some very fun survey data that I have from a couple years ago that I'm going to show in this presentation as well. Here are just some of the more interesting likelihoods. So again, this is likelihood and correlated. So within the AI-enabled user cohort, these buckets of roles were this much more likely to do things. There were also quite a few occasions, and I'm going to go back here super quick. You'll see that there are also quite a few, because the spread is so high, so large, there's quite a few roles that actually do better than their other cohorts. This is not a doom and gloom kind of everyone is more likely to die. People behave differently, and some of them misbehave, and some of them actually behave better. Finance, for example, did shockingly better. All right. So now let's get to our executive meeples. Or I can go back to the other slide and wait for a second. Does anybody have any questions? I did manage to bring up the chat window. So anybody got questions? Want to call something out? Or do you want to know more about our little executive meeple friends?
Let's talk about the executives because that's always fun.
And Brian, you're making an assumption. Finance are better than hiding. Or is it that we've invested in them because they're highly regulated and we force them to go on vacation every year for 2 weeks for us to investigate whether or not they're hiding something? Do not assume. That is your hypothesis, Brian. I can't tell you if you're right or wrong. Imagine for a second how much better our developers might be if we forced them to go on vacation for 2 weeks and then we inspected their code. I think the grass is greener where we water it.
I'll
That is my hypothesis.
I'll stick better at hiding.
I'm just saying, I'm not in the pocket of big fi I wish I were in the pocket of big finance. I wouldn't be worried about my next gig if I were. But but just assume. And again, experience is really important to get these hypotheses, right? We need to be willing to test these hypotheses with the data because there were results in this study that I didn't expect. So this is something I did back at Avanti, actually. It got squished because Zero Day came out the week of its release. But we did a very large survey. And again, the same stipulations as before on surveys are what people say, not necessarily what they do, but the things they admitted to doing in this survey I found shocking. This was collected a few years ago. I'd love to redo this survey at some point at my next gig or wherever I end up. Again, a lot of reasons there could be differences in this. There's a knowledge gap. So they claim that they understand phishing links, but they might not know what they are, which might explain why execs reported more phishing than others because they got more training. This is what they believe. This is not necessarily what is the case. This is what they think, not what actually is. And again, every time you look at a survey, I want you remembering that. And they might want to hide their misbehavior. I'm about to show you some rather interesting things that they say that they do on a regular basis. And they're most likely, that kind of tried and true saying that we have here at Cloud Security Office Hours, where ask a question because surely like 5 or 10 other people had the same question. I guarantee you that same logic here holds, and I'm going to make that assumption, and I would be willing to stand by that assumption, in that this is a floor and not a ceiling. So I'm just going to be quiet for a second and let you look at that. So we asked them, have you ever accessed files you didn't need for your job? These 2 follow-up questions were asked of anyone who said yes. As a wee little innocent woman who had just finished polishing up the first section of the survey in which 98% of our executives said that they supported security mandates, I was rather shocked at these results.
Oh, no, 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 no.
I was personally surprised.
To be
Customer
fair, a lot of leadership, of course, also has access to these types of files more easily.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's documented and publicized cases also for the stuff on the right column.
Yes. I think Dane's proving security flaw is allowed though too under the right circumstances. Yes. How many times have you gone, "Hey, why are you in there?" And they'll go, "Ha, you caught me. I was testing you." That has happened to me. I, so like I'm just saying it is like, yeah, sure. You were testing it. Along with documenting unethical behavior. Like unethical behavior, like accessing files. It's the excuses we gave in those questions were just very funny to me. But to Jay's point, and again for surveys, I'm only dividing here by the executive variable. I'm not dividing by the access variable. So these results would be very different if I had asked like are you able to access? I mean, obviously they are if they were able to, but like if I'd asked the general population of execs and employees, do you think you could access these files? And then ask this question later, I could have reconciled that. So, good call out. Still, what some of my favorite graphs I've ever done. So all of those fucking phishing sims that we spend so much time sending out to our general population, and so much of that time we spend training our executive population as well, because we know that they're actively targeted. And then so many more of them, percentage-wise, actually clicked on a phishing link and sent money. Not were you able to like, and to Jay's point, not all, I didn't ask the question in such a way that having signatory powers and access would have made them answer yes.
Do
This
you
was,
think, Stryker, that this could be because the attacks are more sophisticated on the executives? You know what I mean?
having
Like,
seen executive based fish, no. That is my personal theory. I do think, and to Jay's point in chat, this is why it's so important to have a separate executive security and executive support staff trained targeted just to them. I highly recommend anyone who wants to read this report find out some of the things that they shared with their secretaries and their executive assistants. The free parking phishing theme is diabolical from PO. Yes, there was an interesting BBC article that came out this week about the whole context and pre-texting of a QR code parking phishing scam recently. So yeah, no, it gets really interesting. Sean, to more clearly answer your point and be less facetious, I think some of that is the case, but not enough to make you think it. When I did analysis of the delivered and clicked on phishing messages when I worked in-house as part of a CTI team, it was not the executives. Seniority had no correlation with whether or not it clicked or the sophistication of the fish itself when I was able to view what somebody was looking at. It's very interesting to me that this is the thing. I do, and to Jay's point about having an individual executive, kind of, that was one of the recommendations in this particular report was to do some white glove service. And if any executive needs to have, if any population, in my opinion, in your organization needs to have personally handheld white glove service for security to install a password manager, it would be these people. Please get them on a password manager, make and enforce an MFA. Somebody on LinkedIn this week talked about how an executive couldn't use their Microsoft Authenticator, so their IT team created an executive bypass access group to avoid having them need to enforce MFA. They're dead. Also, the fact that they said that about their current company was silly to me. So, all right, so how do you find your meeples as opposed to finding your people whom you have found here at Cloud Security Office Hours? Here are some different Meeple variables that you can consider when you're thinking about risky behaviors within your employee populations that you should think about. Where have you recently had leadership changes? Where have you recently laid people off? And even if you know that they're not going anywhere, your people don't know that. Where are you allowing people to bring in their own devices? Where are their long-standing employees? In which case, they often get very casual when it comes with access and with security. When I worked in-house and was doing phishing sim analysis, we actually found that the 1 to 4-year-old tenured employees were the second highest by a wide margin of people failing their phishing sims, in addition to just the 6-month in tenured employees. So there's this it's not Dunning-Kruger effect, but familiarity breeds contempt. So tenure is going to play a factor, and that might be different in different ways depending on the environments. Education levels might be a factor. Remote versus on-prem behavior might be a factor. And consider where your cross-telemetry would be. I already mentioned this before. I'll reiterate one of my biggest findings from this and hypotheses as a Intel professional, like if I were running this at any company, this would be one of the first places I would go, is go to my SOC and talk about how do I protect these people on a technical level from indirect prompt injection because they've got high unsafe browsing rates per my EDR. Somebody asked earlier, how am I defining unsafe browsing? It is the EDR detection. Whatever their telemetry has tuned to say this population has gone someplace online that they should not, and whatever their EDR has detected, that was how we were able to do that. So however you do that within your endpoint detection and response, EDR, crossed with whatever you're using to measure AI use, which for me was AI file upload rates, those are going to be your highest. Think about places you can do that cross-pollination, like threat hunting, but with people. It's fun. All right, this is an example. This is not literal, but this is how you can start to think about this, right? Lots of people, when you're computing risk at a company, you compute by likelihood of attack and impact. So what are the chances of something in this year going to screw us up in some way? And then what is the impact? Yes, hi, Jay. Then what is the impact, often measured in terms of dollars, of how bad would this be if this happened, right? This year. And when you multiply the likelihood of something happening in a given year by the dollar impact estimated, you get kind of a number figure in dollars of how bad this is. But where do you start addressing all of these depends also on how people are being manipulated. And so the likelihood of this specific type of meeple being targeted by an attack is represented by where it is on the vertical axis and how close I can estimate they are to some sort of operational impact is where they are left to right on the bottom axis. And then the size of the dot is not just to have it be so I can fit the words in it. The size of the dot is based on their behaviors. How likely do I think they are to actually be exploited? How big is the hole the attacker is shooting through to try and get through to the organization based on what this individual is doing? And that hole gets bigger or smaller depending on what variables you're considering. You have to think about it in this kind of 3D chess way in order to address the correct people and not bug everybody and waste the goodwill that you have in your organization. Upper right is where you want to be. And vendor booth staff is a much bigger circle by the end of the day on the last day of the show floor. This is actually true. Great point. Time might be a variable you want to do. So recognize seasonality is a fantastic variable. Certain populations were more vulnerable to certain types of phishing attacks in the holiday season, at tax time, at election time. Seasonality and timing is a huge variable when it comes to human behavior, and this should be something you guys consider. So, oh, wrong way. Doink. All right, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you guys so much. This has been wonderful. I love how Adversary Village snuck in there, but that's okay. You guys have been lovely.
Thank you so much, Stryker. That was excellent. I'm going to stop the recording.